let's get the big picture into this relationship between employer, employee, I suppose you can throw in labor, government, big business, small business, all of that connected, and the impact of all of that in relation to COVID-19. With me is Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba. He's the Chairperson of Productivity SA. He's also the IOE Vice President to the ILO, and in fact the Vice Chairperson of the ILO. Now the IOE is the International Organization for Employers, and the ILO is the International Labour Organization. So Professor Mdwaba, I appreciate you giving off your time. Now, we've had many chats before. One of the things you've specifically said to me is that the whole response or the implications of COVID-19 around employer-employee is in fact a good thing. Rather a controversial statement. You better tell us why you say what you've just said.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, as I've said, Ashraf, for having me on the big picture. The rationale behind it really is the following, is that if you look at the structural formation of economies, South Africa being a typical example, we always have this assumption that somehow if we keep doing the same thing repeatedly, in the same vein as what is attributable to Einstein, when he said, you do the same thing, but you hope for a different outcome, and yet every time you get it wrong, that's a test for insanity. The whole world really has been insane for too long, and the signs have been there to warn us. And now this virus forces us to come out and come up with a solution. I'll give you an example. So the example in my case is, we talk about informality. Informality in Latin America, in Africa, in most parts of Asia, the whole world sits at about 60 to 65%, right? Now, let's take South Africa as an example. So South Africa's member is BUSA, Business Unity South Africa. Business Unity South Africa is a member of the IOE, in which I'm the Vice President. It's one of the 159 business organizations we have in 150 countries. Right? Now, collectively, we represent over 50 million companies throughout the world through this network. But this is called organized business. So in South Africa, BUSA represents organized business. Now, organized business, if you look at it in terms of the Productivity SA document, for example, that we've given out for circulation at the moment, which is a strategy on how we can recover post-COVID, we make it very clear that South Africa has always had this dual economy, these two economies. One economy that is highly advanced, one of the best in the world, actually. It could, if you take the stock exchange, you take audit firms, you take whatever you like as a measure. We are amongst the best. But that's a very small part of the economy. But it runs South Africa. Small, but it runs South Africa. It keeps us churning, right? So if you were to look at the size of this, let's call it 40% of South Africa's economy. And in that 40%, you have BUSA that is responsible for, let's say, 70% of the economy. Because then you have the Black Business Council, which is a very small percentage, maybe 1%, maybe 2% or whatever it is, right? And then in there, in that 70%, the balance is not organized business. So we're still talking now about the 70% of the 40%. It's not organized business. It's made up of small companies, medium companies, micro companies, companies that are trying to do this and do that and, eke out a living, okay? But they are not part of the IOE structures that I represent in the whole world. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the other 60% that is now your informal sector. Now, with this COVID, you would have seen that the biggest challenge that we've had, and this is a challenge I'm picking up everywhere in the world, is that these are people who are not registered. So you can't pick them up under the UIF, under the Unemployment Insurance Fund. You can't pick them up under the Compensation Fund. You can't pick them up under the institutions that are out there that are supposed to help us and help the small companies in terms of recovery. They cannot be picked up, right? And if you look at the ILO policy behind this, my organization that I'm vice chair of in Geneva, we say we must manage the informal economy in terms of their transition into the formal economy. In fact, our president, if you were listening to him very well, 2 days, 3 days ago, said the same thing. Everything else he said was great until he said that, and I thought, okay, one might need to spend some time with the president and just share with him that actually, I don't think we've got that right, and neither have you, because you can't say you are taking the informal economy and transitioning it into the formal economy. Firstly, it's a very patronizing statement by all of us. Because who said the informal economy wants to be transitioned? They don't want to be transitioned. They want to run businesses the way they do. They actually make a very good living the way they do. And they are bereft of this bureaucracy and red tape we have in the formal economy. And if you look at the future of work, which is now, really, it's not in the future, it's happening as we speak. And you look at the fourth industrial revolution, the fifth, whatever, the sixth, doesn't matter what industrial revolution it is, you will pick up very quickly that work into the future is going to be very informal. There's no formality of work in the future we're going to. There isn't. But we are forcing it because we want to work with these comfortable labels and comfortable packaging that we are used to, right? If you look at Uber, the Uberization and everything, the concepts that came up, yes, Uber, the company, you might say, is a formal company that is registered. But the drivers, the owner drivers of Uber, right now are not getting paid. Nobody is going to their rescue because they don't show. They are not on the radar screen. So when Uber says we've created over 1.3 million workers and drivers all over the world who are earning a living, yeah, until you have a crisis like this, because no government recognizes them. And increasingly, a lot of the kinds of jobs are going to be these kinds of jobs. Now, the elephant in the room is the following, is that the trade unions with whom I have a very good relationship and I love them to bits, don't support these kind of paradigms of supporting the informal sector. But you know why? Because they cannot convert the informal sector into a revenue stream. They can't convert them into a member of a trade union because they're not registered. They don't show up anyway, right? But in a way, that is an embedded, inherent contradiction in what a trade union is supposed to do. It's supposed to ensure that everybody's employed. It's supposed to ensure that everybody lives with dignity. It's supposed to ensure that everybody has decent work, right? Now, if you unpack that, the second elephant in the room is what is happening now, which is in trying to transition and patronize the informal sector and move it into the formal economy, we want to help them, okay? Typical patronizing element. We want to help them, okay? And we have very good intentions, by the way. We all have good intentions. Because when they are not registered, we don't know how to pick them up within the social security, social protection network. Like now, we can't pick them up, right? So it would be great if they are registered with all the bureaucracy we have. And even though we notice that a lot of the formal companies now in the formal economy actually want to go into the informal economy themselves. And now, instead, what we should be doing, what we really should be doing, and this exposes it better than any other time, Ashraf. What we should be doing is looking for an innovative, creative solution to how we can bring informal workers and the informal economy into the social protection network so that they have the social security without transitioning them into the formal sector. Because really, what do we want them to do? We want them to participate in the payments of taxes so that they can contribute to the infrastructure. We want them to participate in ensuring that there's medical aid, there's retirement packages, and all those things. But why is it that we're not looking for a solution to that rather than moving them into this world that we believe is the civilized, clean world of the formalized economy? So that's an example I'd like to give.
I tell you what, you've said so many things, and I can pick up on a whole lot of that, right? Perhaps we can talk about the formal and the informal in terms of the wording in just a moment. I'll come back to that. But therefore, for you to go back to the original point made, that the economic impact of COVID-19 for you, you're saying is a good thing. So I'm going to assume you're going to say it's a good thing because it's shown up what? Meaning to the point, it's a good thing to show up what? To effect what type of change?
Okay. So maybe I should also put it a little bit differently. So it is a very good thing. In the short to medium term, it might not be seen to be. Okay? Because in the short, we're seeing a lot of people dying all over the world, more than any other time. And I don't know if you've noticed that it's affected the first world a lot more, the developed world, a lot more. Of course, other people would argue that, well, in the South, we're still waiting for our winter and so on. Numbers might change. I don't think so, but let's see. Okay? So in the medium, it's affecting a lot of post-lockdown unemployment, enterprises closing down, business continuity is a problem as we speak, and so on and so on. But in the long term, it will give us a better way of looking at things, a complete mind and mental shift on how we need to resolve these issues. Because yes, the biggest pandemic, actually, which was even confirmed yesterday by, I think, the DG of the, I forget the organization, I think it's called the United Nations World Food Program.
Okay, so not the WHO then, no, right?
No, the United Nations World Food Program, which is a sister to the WHO. They mentioned yesterday that we're going to have poverty like we've never seen before, of biblical proportions, they called it. Because they say that by end of 2020, we will end up with double the poverty numbers we had pre-COVID. So that's short, medium term. But if you look at the trends were going that way anyway, just a lot slower. Having more unemployed people every day, having more retrenched people every day, have more poor people every day. And the SDGs 1 and 2, 1 being ending to poverty and 2 ending hunger, we're not dealing with them, right? But the mental shift that we need is one that says, we cannot continue with this insanity of using the wrong structural economic formations that we have, especially in the developing world, to deal with the challenges that we have. Because some of the models we use are imported straight from the developed world, a developed world that is completely oblivious and completely bereft of any understanding of what informality is. They don't know what it is. They read about it. For them, it's theoretical. Even when I speak to the guys, and I speak everywhere, as you know, in the world, I travel about 30 countries a year, right? When you speak informality, you can see that it's a concept. But for you and I, it's not a concept. It's people we live with every day. It's people we see every day. It's people who go home every day, who don't have transport every day. So for me, I'm saying it's going to force all the people that are now emerging, will not be forced, but it will force the people pre-COVID that were in charge. Because there's a difference there, and I'll come back to it as well. People that are emerging as leaders are people like the prof that has emerged now, who's dealing with our health issues, Professor Karim
Abdul. South African perspective, Professor. Yeah,
from South Africa.
Okay. Right, go ahead.
Those are leaders who also are being exposed by this crisis. Where has Professor Karim been all along? I mean, who was hiding him? As much as he may have been doing good work and whatever, but he was kept in a corner somewhere where he doesn't threaten all the people with the big egos, right? The people with the big egos who are completely empty of any knowledge, and the crisis exposes them, because the crisis needs knowledge, needs people who know what to do. So you're going to have all those people being the people who emerge as leaders like we have, who are now going to find a way to recalibrate this world. We're going to find a way. We need to change the policies that we have. As much as they may have been okay 100 years ago, ILO is 101 years old this year, right? For the first time ever, the ILO had to cancel its governing body in March this year, had to cancel its International Labour Conference for the first time every year, because we're being recalibrated to find a way if I use Professor Flacter Lupik's words, as a professor I've encountered recently, who's written a book called The Management Shift, and another book called Humane Capital. And she says, Mthunzi, it's been coming this for a long time. We cannot continue to have this rhetoric about people being the best asset, people being the best, but doing something different. I mean, you've seen for yourself, and I'm not going to mention the name because some of the people that are involved, we both know. But when a company that has 70,000 employees sends a letter to those employees and says, we'll do what we can, but in the meantime, you're going to take forced leave. All of you are going to take forced leave. That's unacceptable behavior by us, the people I represent, business. I represent those people throughout the world.
But here's the question, therefore, and that point you made about the 70,000 employees just leads me onto this important issue. So you are talking about we talk about a cultural reset. You are talking about an economic cultural reset. Do I take it because whatever purpose business served society in the past, well, it's not serving society any longer, and COVID-19 has now shown it up. Is that the way you see
it? Well, I'd like to rephrase it a bit. Yes. First of all, I'm talking about a socio-economic reset, not just economic reset. Okay? And then, but I'm talking also that governments, business, and all the social partners that are involved are going to have to change, because all of us in all the structures do not serve the people who don't have a voice. We purport to. We always say we have a mandate, we represent, but we don't. Actually, we do them a disservice because we are pulling them and pushing them down a line that takes them to no salvation. It doesn't take them to the light. It takes them to an oncoming train that knocks them out, right? Forgive the pun, by the way. I don't know if you're aware that this particular crisis is referred to as the train wreck crisis compared to the global financial crisis, which people say was like a car crash.
I'm aware of it, and yeah, I think it sums it up just more so because it's so horrific, a train versus a bus or a car crash. Absolutely, yeah. Let's just look at some of the nuts and bolts then around the examples you gave, because I think people who may not be interested in macro issues, but certainly are interested in their jobs, right? So here we are. We have a situation of COVID-19. There's a call from just about all governments of the world, besides even the WHO, that you have to practice a form of social distancing. That's the one way to not to eliminate the virus, but to reduce the rate of infection. So, okay, by and large, most countries have bought into that. They understand it's unavoidable. They may have done things technically different, but overall fine. But it comes at the price of the loss of human interaction, which is key to commerce and trade. Okay, so that brings me on to the other issue of when businesses are not involved in trade, they don't need people. In fact, they don't even have the money to generate to pay their staff or employees in this case. Many of them are physically shut. There's no bricks and mortar anymore. So what are your thoughts in terms of the rights issue? So, for example, the example you gave of 70,000 employees being told to take forced leave, if I understand it right, what rights do they have? Because I would think that that would apply all over the world, that example.
Well, I think firstly, you'll forgive me. I just want to go back to something you said, but I know what you meant, but I think our listeners might not appreciate it fully. So when you said, let's move away from the macro issues for people who may not be fully appreciative of those. Actually, the reason I love what I do is that I do a lot of macro things that nobody sees, that people don't see, don't hear about, and all of them impact into the national realities of every country. For example, I'll give you an example, then come and answer you very quickly. Yesterday at 3 o'clock, when I spoke to the fellow officers of the governing body of the ILO, I was made to understand by the Director General of the ILO, who, as we speak, is speaking at the G20 right now. He's at the G20, okay? And we needed to talk about, the content of his speech, the content of the address, and how we lead the world, and so on. And he mentions to me that the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, called him a week ago to have a chat. So he shares the chat, and I get some insight. Oh, that's the chat, and whatever. You would know, of course, that 2 years ago, a few of us got President Cyril Ramaphosa to co-chair the Global Commission on the Future of Work. That's all this macro stuff that must come down and affect the national realities of every country. Now, answering your question, and I think when you talk about 70,000 employees who are forced to take leave, there could, of course, be very different possibilities. And so one needs to be very open-minded about it. You could be dealing with a company, as we've dealt with some of the companies now in Bangladesh, in the agreement that we got signed yesterday by the brands, the largest trade union body I took, and my organization, the IOE, that some of the companies actually have run out of cash themselves. That's a reality. We've got to look at that reality because it's happening. And sometimes, the saying, the bigger you are, the harder the fall, right? But then there's another reality. There's also a reality of companies that as soon as there is a challenge, the first thing they look at is, will we still be able to pay our bonuses at the end of the year? Will we still have to be able to have a shareholder dividend at the end of the year? Now, that is priority that is messed up.
Okay, because what you're saying, bonuses and share dividends is benefits to themselves, as opposed to how do we ensure that as a business we don't just impact to our own bottom line, but also impact to the bottom line of all the employees. Basically, the type of social security and the role that business should be having within that, isn't it?
You've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. Because when you preserve the business and when you preserve the people concomitantly in the business, you preserve the community. And when you preserve the community, it follows that you preserve your country. You're preserving economies of the country. I mean, it follows. It all stacks up, right? So that is the kind of selfishness that we need to deal with. And now, what are your rights? Because your question is, what are your rights? Firstly, no one can force you to take your leave away from you. Okay? So what has to happen is that they have to engage, the employees have to engage with the Department of Employment and Labor, so that the department has to engage the company in terms of all these forms of assistance from the UIF and many other things. If they need assistance, sure, they must get assistance and they must be given. But you cannot, on day one of the lockdown, say, forced leave. You're not even saying, okay, we'll give you what we have for now. Let's give you some 50%. We're working on the other 50% and whatever. Especially the kind of companies I'm talking about are the kind of companies when you look at it, you think, there is no way they don't have a cash surplus in the bank. I'm sorry. It's not possible. Okay? So your right then is to engage with the Department of Employment and Labor and to ensure that this travesty is known and dealt with. But also it calls for the governments as well to be far more proactive in the future in the way they do things. And that's why I'm saying that it's a total mind shift, it's a total mental shift on how we're going to do things. And business, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm a capitalist, Ashraf, through and through. Okay? But I do believe that your consciousness, and in terms of the decisions you make, you've always got to find a way of balancing the imperatives of people's well-being together with making your business successful. Because sustainability of the business continuity is absolutely paramount. But it cannot be from a productive point of view. When you talk about productivity principles, you cannot sustain a business when you're busy killing the people and you're killing the community that it comes from. Because then it's not sustainable for all of us.
Well, I mean, historically, would you therefore say that for a long, long time that business, and I'm speaking in broad strokes, of course, right, that business was seen as employing people only and keeping them and paying them only so far as they contribute to the means of production and bottom line of the company. That means they never saw their role bigger than that. And if I can understand you correctly, you're suggesting now a cultural and economic shift that is taking place. There's this buzzword called conscious capitalism. Some socialists would throw that out completely, but I mean, we get the gist of what is being said, right? That capitalism must have a warmer face in understanding its role to not just its shareholders, but to society as well.
I would say not only a warmer face, but also a warmer hand, touch. You know, that human emotion you were talking about. That is what makes a big difference at the end of the day. I mean, yes, I mean, you know, the means of production sort of Marxist view that you've mentioned. I mean, as it turns out, I majored in industrial sociology, so Marx was one of my biggest areas of interest. But I think that we do need a conscious capitalism, conscientious capitalism that works very well with the principles of dignity of people, that works very well with the principles of decency. And we have a lot of those. The members that I represent all over the world represents that. But in the limitation that I shared with you, the shortcoming that I shared with you, is that unfortunately even our own model of organized business has got shortcomings, because we represent a lot of people that I would hope are all of the ilk that we are talking about. But it's a very small percentage in the world. What happens to the other 50% or so that we don't represent? Those people who fall outside the ambit of our operation as an entity like the International Organization of Employers, because I can tell you, when talking to my colleagues, I was saying to them, you know, I've always known that the IOE is a very special business organization, but the crisis has revealed for me how special it is. You know, its competitive edge. We were asked the one time by Amina Mohammed, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the UN. She came to the ILO and she didn't know about this IOE. She said, what makes you different, you as the IOE? Why are you different from the ICC, from BIAC, from all these business organizations? We said to them, well, what makes us different is that we're very in touch with the people factor. The socio-economic factors abound into one, but also we are part of the social dialogue and tripartism world that consults, that engages, and acts together. You don't do things and then go and explain later, which is really the kind of environment you were referring to earlier, when your workers are just part of your means of production. You can do anything you like because actually you own them. You know, you can tell them after the fact that, you know what, we've decided we're retrenching, which is absolute rubbish. It's absolute rubbish, which is also what, as Productivity South Africa, in that document that we've circulated, we are trying to say to South Africans, for too long have we had a situation where productivity in this country is subordinated to many other things, that when people are going around like headless chicken, and all of them purport to be doing something and are all busy, which is something about us South Africans. We tend to be very busy. But when you actually look, are we being efficient? No. Are we being effective? No. Why? Because all of us talk a good talk, but actually we work in very siloed, egotistical areas, which is why I'm hopeful that the 100 billion that the president set aside for the creation of jobs, I'm very hopeful that even if it's 1 billion of that, it needs to go to Productivity SA, because that's really been the problem I've been fighting for the last few years, to say, hey, we're the only entity that is a creation of the Employment Services Act. We're the only entity that is supposed to contribute and lead and collaborate in the creation of jobs, in the retention of jobs, and in the creation of a competitive environment, and the creation of an economy that grows.
Well, maybe it's a good time to just touch on that. I mean, I've seen the document. We can get into the details some other time, but in essence, I mean, there are some specific changes, and your point about the productivity movement is amongst them foremost, right? So it's something that you and I have chatted about often as well. You know, how then do you effect change in South Africa so that productivity becomes an intrinsic part of the DNA of individuals, the people that is, and also the DNA of the entire country?
You know, when you ask me that question, Ashraf, I get absolutely excited because, you know, for 4 years before the Minister of Employment and Labor renewed my appointment in November, actually just now of last year, as the chair again of productivity, there were many times I wanted to throw the towel. I wanted to say, you know what, I don't need this rubbish. Okay, as a German friend of mine and my daughter like to refer to it as cognitive dissonance. You know, when on the one hand I'm appointed by the minister to do this job, but at the same time I have to convince the minister what it is I have to do. It's like, what? I mean, why did you bring me here? So the first thing we need to do is to change mindsets. So we are doing it one step at a time, you know, which is one of the things I believe, one of the things that the multilateral environment has taught me, Ashraf, is first listen. You know, first listen. You know, and you can imagine when you listen to 187 countries, you listen and listen and listen. And then once you've listened, then offer a suggestion towards a solution so that people can participate in the suggestion and in the solution as it happens, right? And be happy to change your mind along the way. Keep an open mind. Don't offer a suggestion and then close ranks and say, it will only be like this. So the first thing, one of the things we are doing is, as I'm speaking to you, we've just finalized yesterday a cabinet memo that is going to propose to the government of South Africa that productivity should not be the preserve of the Department of Employment and Labor, but actually we would like them to declare October month as productivity month. Because we have the productivity awards, as you know, every October. But every year we have to lobby the very people who gave us birth, the government, to come and see what we do. So you have to lobby them and say to them, you know, you got to come and pull them, you know, kicking and screaming. So we're saying, but that's not on. You can't. I mean, you can't make the rules and then break them yourself. So here's the thing. We would like you to declare it a productivity month. Secondly, we would like the president to embrace it, and demonstrably so by coming himself to speak at the Productivity Awards to show everybody, every South African citizen, similarly to what he's been doing during the crisis, which is amazing. But now we're asking him to do it in a normal environment, not when he's shocked and traumatized. Okay? He must do it because that is what we need. We need his presence. We need to see him lead. That's one of the things. The other one we are doing is to say all the agencies within the South African environment, the institutions whose job is to be leaders of the economic cluster, whose job is to ensure that we create employment, let's all work together and collaborate to ensure that the programs that we have become mainstreamed. They become integrated into the fabric of society of South Africa from cradle to the grave throughout. That's really the things that, I mean, I'm summarizing.
Yeah. But I mean, here's the thought, just a quick one for the moment, right? So I understand what you're saying about getting the president on board and getting departments to take productivity very, very seriously. But is there still how far are you down the road to a switch on from a switch off mentality to productivity? So what I'm saying is, when people are faced with adversity, as we are faced now, when people are faced with difficulties, when people even have things that are pretty mundane, but we want to move our country to a level of excellence, how do they buy into a productivity DNA? Simply by us giving them a buzzword. That's why I'm saying a switch, a bulb, that gets them to react immediately. Because I don't see that happening right now.
Well, I think that when you talk to our ordinary colleagues and friends and fellow workers, I don't think the thing to do is to throw a buzzword at people. You know, it's like you and I are communicators, right? And you and I think, agree that we could use very big words, but it would be counterproductive because nobody's going to understand what we just said, right? So we need to be as simplistic as we possibly can in our messaging. We need to be as simplistic as we possibly can in our doing. Now, the first thing you do is not to throw productivity words. The first thing you do is to throw programs at people, is to throw interventionist programs that we have in abundance at Productivity SA. The thing we don't have in abundance is resourcing. The things we don't have is the enablement of us taking those programs to more people. The kind of people we have, for example, in the Productivity Awards, who come to us who are in cooperatives, who say, but why are you not doing more? I mean, you know this, so I don't have to preach to you, but I'm going to repeat it for your listeners. Why are you not doing more? Why are you not giving us this? This is what we need. We say, well, we can't. We don't have the money. We don't have the tools. We have the programs, but we don't have the tools. So you've got to go to the powers that be and convince them to do that. So all along, we've had to break the window to gain entrance into a conversation, for example, on the minimum wage setting in this country. We had to break the windows and the doors to be in there. And yet Convention 131 of the ILO on minimum wages says productivity is an essential part of the minimum wage setting dispensation, right? As an example. When we had the Job Summit of 2018, we had to lobby people going to the summit. We were not invited. We forced our way in. We had to lobby people to say, hey, you can't do this Job Summit with us, please. Ultimately, when they were doing the framework agreement, they said, oops, that Productivity SA must be accountable. That Productivity SA together with the ILO. So what we need to do right now for people, especially in this time of crisis, when we know that the biggest pandemic is going to be unemployment and poverty, even more than the COVID. Our people fear unemployment and poverty far more than the COVID. I mean, it might be a scary thought, but it's true. It's true.
Okay, let me then bring it back to COVID-19 right now. Now, many countries in the world having some form of lockdown of sorts. South Africa clearly does have it. So yes, unemployment, loss of income for businesses and individuals is happening as we talk right now. Okay, what then is your advice to businesses, big, medium, small, and those important informal businesses that we spoke about earlier on? What should they be doing now? What is your advice to them?
Well, I think it has to start like this. I'm going to go back again to that macro level. And then come back to micro very quickly. So you will be aware, Ashraf, that about 3-4 weeks ago, the IOE made a global call, a call to arms, on all the institutions under the ambit of the UN, the United Nations, which includes the ILO, as well as institutions like the IMF, BRICS Bank, World Bank, all of these institutions to collaborate and work together in ensuring that there are global funds that are made available to countries, particularly developing countries, that there has to be relaxed, flexible terms that are given that are extraordinary compared to the very stringent conditionalities that they normally associate to things. And that, by the way, that call was heeded. That call was heeded. There's a lot of assistance that's happening as we speak for the various countries, and I'm involved with that, as you know, on an everyday basis. Now, South Africa, if you heard our president speaking again 2-3 days ago, he did say, when he was asked, where are you going to get this 500 billion from? He said, well, 130 we have in our normal budget. He'll unpack it tonight. And then he said the other, they're still negotiating with the IMF, with the BRICS Bank, and so on and so on. So whilst we're waiting for those to happen, and I have no doubt in my mind it will happen. And that's how you see that links to the macro level. That's why I like to go to the macro level, because we laid the foundation at the global level, at IOE, together with ITUC and whatever we laid the thing to say there. So when South Africa comes to speak, they are ready to speak to them. And now, as businesses, what we have asked for is that business continuity is absolutely key. Now, until the lockdown is over, it's also very difficult to give proper advice as to what do you do, because we don't know. But let's assume the president were to say 1st May, okay, that's May Day. 2nd day of May, we are going to have a little bit of a relaxation, a progression, a systemic kind of opening up of the economy. Then we are saying that the banks and themselves need to have conversations, because you need to speak to your bank, a bank that has also been enabled, of course, by the state and so on, to talk about the flexibility of loans that they may have, the flexibility of interest rates, the flexibility of looking together with your landlords, deal with those issues. but make sure that whether it's through the UIF in South Africa or an equivalent anywhere else in the world, that you work together with the social protection entities to bridge the gap and manage the situation. But we need to get back as quickly as possible to the optimal proficiency levels of our businesses. And of course, it's going to be slow. Things are not done immediately, but they also need to speak to entities like Productivity SA to say, what interventionist programs have you got? Rather than rushing to go and do Section 189s, Section 189 is when you give that notice to retrench. Can we find a different way, which is one of the proposals, by the way, that I forgot, that we are making to government, in that for future purposes, when you are going to retrench, as opposed to it being a voluntary thing for you to speak to Productivity SA, we are asking for it to be now peremptory, that as soon as you decide to retrench, you must notify Productivity SA at the same time as you notify the CCMA, so that we can come and look at whether operationally you don't have inefficiencies that are causing the problem, then you are taking it out on the people. Okay? So we can come in and have a look with you, and then we can say, okay, we have a problem here. And if we have a problem, we can work together with you to go to the UIF, to go to whatever fund we have, to go to the Solidarity Fund if it's going to assist, or any other fund, to say, how do we assist this business so that we don't retrench these people? Because as it is, pre-COVID, South Africa was already looking at what, 29, 30, 31% unemployment, which has never recovered from the global financial crisis, which pre-global financial crisis was sitting at about 20%. So one could end up with about 35%. So we need all hands on deck. We need a collaborative approach, but it's a collaborative approach, Ashraf, that must not have the usual people in authority being mistaken for leaders. People in authority are not necessarily leaders. Sometimes they are, but more often than not, they are not. Leadership is what we are seeing with the people who are leading us now, the Dr. Zweli Mkhize's of this world, who are leading us. Those are leaders that, for me, I want to say that's my leader. So that would be my response.
Well, I'll tell you what. You spoke about the other leader earlier on, which is Professor Salim Abdul Karim, right? And suggested, he's come from beyond the boundaries and suddenly taken up a formidable position. But the reality is, if you look at his track record, it was formidable anyway, right? Now, I'm saying that only because I'm going to suggest, therefore, that the opportunity has arisen now for Productivity SA specifically, or in general terms, and Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba as the chairperson, not the hands-on person, right, to make the type of intervention, not in a month or two, but absolutely make the intervention now to effect serious change in determining where business and employers and employees go right away. Right now, what I'm talking about, an imminent intervention, because that's what it's calling for.
And I agree with you. I want to agree with you wholeheartedly. And that's why some of you who are my friends were being spammed with this document, which we call the South Africa's Economic Recovery Plan Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic, a strategy to unlock the productive potential for improved competitiveness and sustainable economic growth. That's why I was spamming you with you having to comment on LinkedIn, comment on Twitter, because we've decided as the board of Productivity SA under my leadership, we are sick and tired of waiting. Okay, we've made a lot of headway, I must tell you. I mean, if I were to say 4 years ago, if you were to say on a people accepting productivity 0 to 10, I would have said just maybe 1. Okay, but if you speak to me today, I would give you a 6. But a 6 out of 10 is still not good enough, because we need to have the money in the bank. We need to have all hands on deck. We need to collaborate today, imminently, as you say. So that's why we've done it that way, is to say we are going to pressurize and push everybody and galvanize everybody into action. Everybody must see that we're not waiting. We want South Africans to comment. We want South Africans to tell us what is their bugbear, what it is we must do, so that I can get my people to run in there. I can push the Minister, Thulas Nxesi, of Employment and Labour, to act far more quickly when they leave the G20 today, where they will be told the same thing, by the way, by Guy Ryder, the DG, that go and make sure that enterprises have immediate business continuity so that workers can be kept in jobs. But I also want to say something that you would not possibly allow me, but that I must say because I have the opportunity, and hopefully you will not edit it because we're not live, is that we also need a lot of people who, if you follow that spirit that I think was espoused back in the day by Thabo Mbeki of Vuk'uzenzele, where people don't know, Ashraf, that you, beyond being a communicator, beyond being a businessman, beyond being a broadcaster, you also took it upon yourself to start something called an innovators group. Okay? I mean, when we started the group, when you started the group, I don't know, there were 5 of us or 10 of us. You wanted to make it 50 people. I don't know. It looks like now it's like, I don't know, like 100 people or maybe 200 people. You never kept your promise of keeping it to 50. But the point, though, is you've assembled a very good, solid number of innovative, entrepreneurial people, creative people, solution-oriented people, good minds, intellectual capital, thought leaders, to engage, talk about things, see how things can be done, share experiences. And I think we need a lot more people. That for me is productivity, by the way. That is making sure that when you do things tomorrow, you do them better than you did today.
Well,
that is making.
I'll tell you what. I mean, I'm not going to edit this because it's important. I mean, yes, that innovators group part of the whole Champion South Africa project that I drive, and I just want to bring this up because it contextualizes what you're saying. The key part or the key mantra of the Champion South Africa movement, and the innovators group is just one part of it, is this, which is champion people build champion nations. Now you'll appreciate that champion people build champion nations. So how do we get champion people to be at the very center of all productivity so they truly build champion nations? And here's the point before you answer it. For me, fundamentally, how do you get people to understand that when they win, their country wins, and when their country wins, they win? So that intrinsic link between your success and your country's success. How do we get everybody to buy into that?
Ashraf, I have a very simple view to life. I mean, but I'm going to repeat it for purposes of our audience here, that my whole purpose in life is global change, global impact, and global social justice. I'm very fortunate because I have platforms to do this. Okay, I worked hard to get to these platforms until I realized what it is I'm supposed to do. One of the things it's taught me, though, is to be a little bit more patient with life. Because, when you're young, you want everything to happen overnight, right? You see everything happening immediately. But I've come to understand sometimes that things happen one step at a time, one brick at a time, one person at a time. Sometimes it's not the quantity you're looking for. It's the quality you're looking for. So the quality that you've assembled, for example, as the innovators group, that you've assembled as these champions that create a champion country, a champion South Africa, and a champion continent, and a champion world. I mean, we could take it as far as it goes, right? Those people are not only needing to be at the center of productivity and what we do. They already are. They are. What you've done by assembling them into one platform is to make them a lot stronger because now they are united. Okay? United in purpose, may not necessarily be united in everything they have to say, and they shouldn't be because this is a diverse group, but very united in the purpose and in looking for different ways of doing things. But what we need to do, and what will happen eventually, and this crisis, one of the reasons I'm saying this is the best thing that ever happened, it's going to reveal those kind of people even more to the world. Like Professor Karim. Those people, as you said, he was always formidable. You were always formidable. I can tell you I've always been formidable. But there are people who are in denial, who egotistically do not want to give us the platforms we require. This crisis is going to force everybody to have all hands on deck. No one is going to be in hiding anymore. The people who have their own ulterior motives are going to be pushed to the side because they are too concentrated on who they are rather than what they can do and what they are able to do, right? So now we're going to be freed. All these people are going to be freed to do more with the platforms that they have. That is my true view.
Okay, well, maybe it's a good way to almost end with this last point. Looking at the document from yourself on Productivity SA, one of the things you alluded to is like this new agenda, right? So we go to a post-COVID-19 world, and how do you visualize this new agenda appearing? Actually, if you can put a picture to it, what would this new world? I don't want to sound like a former president of the USA, but how would this new agenda then look like?
This new agenda would look like agencies of the South African government collaboratively working towards interventionist programs that are well resourced, accepting that productivity is at the center of this revolution, starting a productivity movement in a big way, and starting by the very people that are leading this country, like the president who's been omnipresent in our crisis lives. We need him to be a productivity omnipresent ambassador and member of the movement, leading from the front. We need to appoint the right ambassadors to these positions. You know my view about having ambassadors, productivity ambassadors, who are going to be out there sharing the good news whilst they implement. Much more implementation than rhetoric. And in all this, there will be different leaders for different days. You can't ask Productivity South Africa to lead in everything. Productivity South Africa must lead in the area in which it has expertise. The National Treasury and their entities, the DTI and their entities, the Department of Employment and Labor and other entities must lead in the different areas, but in a very collaborative, collective approach.
Well, I tell you what, of all the things you've said, that last part, mapping out a new agenda, gives us, I think, a very big picture of where you are and where you want to go, and certainly where the country ought to go. Because, I mean, the bottom line to this, and I'll just leave you a final thought that you can say and comment on this, is if that all falls into place, right, then the world, to borrow a very cliched phrase, the world will be a better place to live in, and South Africa in particular will be a better place to live in as well.
Again, as someone who, I must repeat, goes to an average of 30 countries a year, I don't think there is a better country than South Africa, Ashraf. I always look forward to coming home. And when I listened to the executive director of the World Health Organization last night saying that South Africa has done some incredible things in managing this crisis, that Africa is doing some innovative leading things, they mentioned the Congo and other countries in doing things, I'm not surprised. For me, it's not a surprise. It's some of us have always been frustrated by our lack of an ability to unlock the power within ourselves, to realize how powerful we are as South Africans. Because every time we've been asked to do things by somebody else, like the World Cup of 2010, we've come out smoking and did it well. But when we do things for ourselves, for some reason, the gun jams. I don't know why the gun always jams, And hopefully this is the turnaround. Hopefully this is the management shift. Hopefully this is where we move into the humane, aspect of who we are and the do it like Nike kind of spirit that we need to make South Africa a better place and the world a better place.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end up, because, I mean, that's really the point. For some reason, when South Africa does it internally, we tend to not do it too well. But when we do it for the World Cup, as we've done 2010, and then winning a World Cup as well, and then now doing it around the issues of healthcare, around COVID-19, we seem to be doing it far, far better. Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba, thank you for your time and giving us the big picture into your thoughts, your mind around complex issues in South Africa and all around the world.